Hey guys, it's Brandon. Recently, one of my best friends shared with me a video by Steve Jobs in 2005. I've heard bits and pieces of this speech before in the past, but when he shared it with me recently, it just came at a really appropriate time for me. It really made a big impact on me, so much so that I've kind of been rewatching it a few times, trying to soak in all of the words and all of the little ideas that he put into this speech. I think that this speech is very relevant to me just because of the point that I'm at in my life, this journey of trying to discover what I'm good at, trying to discover how to put those skills to the use, how to find fulfillment in life and fulfillment in work. So yeah, it was just very motivational and very inspirational for me. And so I wanted to make this video because I wanted to put my thoughts out there, but also if you haven't heard this speech, if you're on a similar journey to what I'm going through, or you're just on any journey of your own, everybody has their own challenges and their own forks in the road. I think this speech can definitely motivate you, it can inspire you, and you can get some value out of it. I'm just gonna kind of go through some of the pieces of his speech that I really thought had the biggest impact on me and share it with you.
So I decided to drop out and trust that it would all work out okay. It was pretty scary at the time, but looking back, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. The minute I dropped out, I could stop taking the required classes that didn't interest me and begin dropping in on the ones that looked far more interesting.
Okay, so the first part of this video talks about this idea of facing decisions that are intimidating or scary to us. In Steve Jobs' case, he just kind of had to trust that the decision that he was making came from good intentions and that in the end, that things would work out okay. For me personally, leaving my job, looking at new things to do, leaving this comfort, I feel like it resonates with me because there is a certain degree of just having trust that things will work themselves out. If we can remain as good people, conscientious people that are respectful of others and respectful to ourselves, then oftentimes, these decisions that we take, they do work out. And it's just about having that trust and facing the fear of the unknown and moving forward with that trust in mind. After that, Steve Jobs goes on to talk about how dropping out of college was beneficial also because it allowed him to stop taking the classes that he wasn't actually interested in, but they were just simply requirements, and instead start to take classes that he genuinely had an interest in and kind of piqued his curiosity. I think that's relevant to us too, when we are experimenting with a lot of different things. Sometimes it seems a bit random, it seems a bit unstructured. We can get pressure from other people because it doesn't seem like we are really following a linear path. In this case, I think one thing that he speaks to is the idea that these seemingly random things, if they are pursued because you genuinely are excited about them or you're genuinely curious about them, they will come to have a lot of benefit in your life. And the specific example he gives in this speech is how, he took a seemingly random calligraphy class and how it didn't make sense, it wasn't a requirement for his degree, but once he dropped out, he was able to take this class and it eventually worked its way into the styling of the Mac, of Apple. And he says if he hadn't taken that class, that none of that would have been incorporated into Apple. None of that would have been incorporated into the Mac.
And since Windows just copied the Mac, it's likely that no personal computer would have them.
And so something so seemingly random actually had a way of fitting itself into his life. So let's see the next part.
Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future, because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart, even when it leads you off the well-worn path, and that will make all the difference.
Okay, so this part I thought was really profound too. It kind of plays off of what we just talked about, making these decisions, seemingly random things, having a way of working themselves out. For me, it kind of builds this imagery of actual dots. As you move forward and you're you're pursuing these different dots, these different subjects, these different ideas in your mind, sooner or later they start connecting in different ways that you hadn't anticipated that they would, and suddenly they emerge as patterns that play out in your life to your benefit. Again, it's this idea of having trust that dots that don't really seem to relate to each other, that they will connect in the future. But not only that, but having that trust to begin with is what's going to give you the confidence. You know, I think for me, that's what resonates about that is I have kind of been doing seemingly random things since leaving my most recent job. I left the job, I started living in a car, I've been just doing odd jobs here and there to make money, and I've been working on a lot of videos recently and trying to practice creativity a bit more. There's a lot of ideas that I have going forward into the future that also seem a little bit more off the well-worn path and maybe a bit random to some other people. But again, it resonated with me because it's this idea that you have to trust that those dots are going to connect at some point.
I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life.
Now, me having quit my job and having something that was very secure and very stable and had a very clear projection of, making a living, leaving that and then going into making a lot less money and just kind of being, a bit nomadic, perhaps unguided in some ways. It certainly freed me up to feel like a beginner again. I think that's one thing that's been very difficult for me because it's something that at least I can be very easily self-conscious about, being at this age and not having something really secure, but instead feeling like you're just a beginner, that you're still lost, that you're still searching. That definitely is an obstacle, that self-consciousness is an obstacle to overcome. But I really resonate with the idea that he says that was actually a very good thing for him, to feel that lightness of being a beginner. And not only that, but because of that lightness, he says that it freed him up to enter one of the most creative periods of his life. I think creativity is so important to happiness and fulfillment. By creativity, I mean the ability to design something, picturing the ideal situation for you as a person in the future, picturing your ideal life, picturing your ideal self, and then finding a way to actually design that. I know for me right now, I've definitely felt like I've entered a much more creative period in my life, simply because I'm not relying so much on structure, and I'm not relying so much on something that offers security. And so, I've been working with things like creating video content. I've been working with things like living out of my car. I've started to meditate. I've been experimenting with fasting a little bit, maybe moving to another state, maybe looking for another job that doesn't pay nearly as well, but gets me towards a direction that I actually want to go in. All of these things, I think, take creativity, and it's a muscle that I'm still trying to build for myself. I think going forward, I'm hoping and I'm planning to have the next months, the next years be the most creative periods of my life. So I'm definitely excited about that.
I'm pretty sure none of this would have happened if I hadn't been fired from Apple. It was awful tasting medicine, but I guess the patient needed it.
This quote, I think, was one of the biggest things that swirled around in my head once I first heard it. It was awful tasting medicine, but I guess the patient needed it. That's, I think, what I've been shooting for recently. To have this medicine, something that will be good for you, it will be healthy for you, and it'll help you grow. But it tastes awful. It involves suffering, it involves discomfort. I think I've been doing that with quitting my job, with living in my car, and some of these other things that I've been doing and other things that I have planned. I see it as that awful tasting medicine. Sometimes people don't seem to get why I've been doing some of these things. In fact, I've had some family, when they first found out that I was living in a car and they saw the videos that I posted, they were a bit concerned that maybe I was depressed, or maybe I had some issues at home or with family, and it made me kind of escape from those things. But it really wasn't that. It was just, I saw it as something that involved a bit of suffering, a bit of discomfort, and in return would be medicine for me. And, of course, the other part of this quote says, but I guess the patient needed it. And yeah, I think that's definitely where I am right now. I've been, in many ways, fortunate to live a very comfortable, cushy life. I've been given so many different things in life. And I think a part of growth is that suffering, that discomfort. It's the challenge, Part of growth is the challenge. And so me being the patient, or you being the patient, sometimes we need that awful tasting medicine. Sometimes we need that kick in the butt. We need to be really challenged to the edges of our limits in order to break past it in really profound ways. So anyways, I just thought that was a really cool quote, and I think about it all the time. So I just wanted to share that part.
Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking and don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know when you find it.
Wow, so there was a lot packed into that. Mostly it's just this idea of not settling for anything less than what really brings you excitement, what brings you enjoyment. When I think about the job that I had previously, I typically think of something that I didn't enjoy and I wasn't really good at. And I think those two things are very well connected. I wasn't really good at my job because I didn't enjoy going in every day. I thought about what opportunities lay ahead in that career path and what my boss was hoping from me. It was this responsibility of taking charge of the company eventually, taking charge of the team, being responsible for the portfolio of real estate for all of our clients, being responsible for the portfolio of real estate for my boss's children and his grandchildren. I just started to think about, if I wasn't excited to go into work every day, I do believe that it would result in me not being able to produce the best work that I possibly could. And if I was going to be responsible for the assets, the future livelihood of my boss's children and his grandchildren, it would just be a recipe for disaster to have someone like myself that just was not excited about it and thus could not be the best possible candidate for it. Anyways, let's get to the next part.
And since then, for the past 33 years, I've looked in the mirror every morning and asked myself, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? And whenever the answer has been no for too many days in a row, I know I need to change something.
So this quote by Steve Jobs is something that I think I have heard in the past, actually. It was still something that has kind of stuck with me for all these years since I first heard it. And for me, that's kind of a weird one right now, in my life, because when I figuratively look in the mirror and ask myself, am I doing the thing that I would want to be doing if it's the last day of my life? There's a lot of yeses and nos that I could answer for that. I'm not already living my ideal life, and I'm not already my ideal self. So in some ways, no, I'm not doing exactly what I would already like to be doing. But I can say that oftentimes the things that I do each day, I feel are pushing me in a direction or preparing me to reach that ideal self in the future. One thing that I really do enjoy doing each day, and one thing that would be a yes, would be just learning. I actually spend a lot of time at my computer, on YouTube, on blogs, and just browsing the internet, and just kind of listening to speeches, listening to podcasts and interviews, or just researching things that, again, going back to the beginning of the video, are seemingly random or don't necessarily seem like they're going to get me straight to a particular goal, but they're just things that I'm interested in. And so growth, learning, and becoming a better all-around person, with my personality, with how I treat other people, with how I view the world, and how I treat myself, mentally and physically. Those are all very important things to me, and those are yeses that I can often say, each day that I'm doing when I look in the mirror. So yeah, it's a mixed bag, but I really love that quote because it is really important, I think, to take into account that every day that we go without being excited, every day that we go without really feeling joy, feeling love, feeling passion for something. For me personally, I would hope that it's because I'm sacrificing to get some of that in the future. It's a shame to go too long without getting that. You know, there needs to be that payoff. Okay, now this next part, when he says, remembering that I'll be dead soon.
Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose.
I think that's something that, I don't know, maybe you could say it's become cliche, this idea that, you know, you should live in the moment, or you should do the things that you truly want to do, because tomorrow isn't guaranteed and we could all get hit by a truck tomorrow. It certainly is true, and I don't think there's anybody in this world that would doubt that it's 100% a possibility. I do feel like despite that, a lot of people, including myself, have a way of really taking that for granted for extended periods of time. I was talking to my dad recently about my blood clot that I had in my leg, and you know, he's had some heart problems in the past, as well as some other people that we both know that are going through far worse than what we've gone through in terms of medical problems. But it's so crazy to think about how whenever these things happen, you know, somebody has a stroke or somebody discovers that they have cancer, I feel like they almost always come from a singular event that draws your attention to it. Maybe you're just doing some normal task, you're washing the dishes or something, and then suddenly you drop something and it's not really known why, but you start to feel a little bit faint. Or maybe you wake up one day and you discover like some sore or some bump on your body that you never noticed before. And it all kind of just happens in this one moment. But then from that moment, that singular point in time, nothing else is ever the same. You end up going to the hospital, they give you some diagnosis, and suddenly all your priorities shift. Things beyond our control can happen in an instant. And suddenly the last thing that we'll ever want to do is go to a job that we hate or to be with people that aren't treating us well. Suddenly all our priorities will become so clear, but it doesn't have to get to that point where you realize it only because something catastrophic happens. You know, obviously in this speech, Steve Jobs later goes on to talk about the cancer, the pancreatic cancer that he had. I looked it up. This speech is in 2005. And later on in this speech, he says that he was able to overcome the cancer. They had a surgery to remove the tumor. He was very grateful for that, and he was hoping to never have to face that again for at least a couple of decades. And it turns out that it was only 6 years from the time that he gave this speech to the time that he passed away. So he had far less than the time that he was hoping for. Then he talks about this idea that knowing that you're going to die is one of the best ways to avoid the trap of thinking that you have something to lose. It made an impact on me because, yeah, when it comes to making decisions, sometimes there's just so much fear and apprehension because we do feel like we have something to lose. And more often than not, we should take a step back and really honestly assess that. So it's almost over. I think there are a couple other things that I thought were really good, but let's see where they are.
Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become.
Okay, so this is the second to last part of the speech that I wanted to talk about. I think in today's day and age, it's pretty relevant just with comparison through social media and other people's lives is something that a lot of people have to really fight off. And so this part of that just speaks to not giving into those pressures or the pressures of maybe like family that doesn't really see the value in you doing what your heart tells you to do, but rather wants you to pursue something that provides you that security or that income and that stability. And then of course at the end of that quote, he says to have the courage to follow your heart and your intuition, that they somehow already know what you truly want to become. And that was another thing that I thought a lot about, because whatever it is that is in your heart and your intuition, that it's because they know the truth. You know, that is the truth. Too often we kind of try to silence those things, our heart and our intuition. And I think that can lead to less fulfillment in life, less happiness, less excitement, less passion.
It was their farewell message as they signed off. Stay hungry, stay foolish. And I have always wished that for myself. Stay hungry, stay foolish. Thank you all very much.
Okay, so the very last part of this speech is Steve Jobs talking about this publication that was out when he was a kid. And when this publication eventually went out of business, their very last issue had a picture of a winding road and the quote that said, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." I thought it was a really good ending because, it just kind of summed everything up, like to keep that passion, to keep that excitement, and to not be afraid to forge your own path. I think sometimes like ideas of starting your own business or starting a YouTube channel or starting a blog, things that aren't really traditional means of making a living, sometimes do seem very foolish to our parents, to our friends, or even to ourselves to some degree. But based on everything that Steve Jobs said in this commencement speech up until this point, that was just a great conclusion, to stay foolish. And so that's what I plan to keep doing. And I plan to keep listening to this speech, and I hope that you got something out of it, especially if you hadn't seen it before. But even if you have seen it, to like have the reminder that I had. I hope you enjoyed this video. As Steve Jobs said, stay hungry, stay foolish. And as I've been saying on this YouTube channel, when we're on this journey and we're going through all these decisions and we're thinking about what our next step is or what we want for ourselves to become, on that journey, we're not going to survive out there, we're going to thrive out there.